Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros, helping students to succeed on all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school in Cleveland, Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with tests, school, and life, based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 50 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and college admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is You Can't Handle the Truth, Secrets of College Admissions. But first, let's meet our special guest, Parke Muth.
Parke Muth has worked in education for over 35 years. He served as a dean in the admissions office at the University of Virginia. While at UVA, he was director of selection and recruitment of honor scholars, director of application assessment training, and director of international admission. He has served for over 25 years as a member of the Jefferson Scholars Selection Committee and advisor for the Ron Brown Scholars Program. He now works with companies, schools, families, and students across the world, focusing on Asia, where he spends about half of the year. Because of his experiences in admissions, Parke is a highly sought-after speaker and has been interviewed by most major media outlets across the country. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel a little embarrassed because now I have to live up to both the title and the the rest that follows. But let me just talk a little bit about myself and why I think I can address this, because there are lots of people who want to see behind those closed doors, but they can't. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who are advising people who work behind those closed doors to shut up, because there are things that legal counsel, who it's their nature, they're risk averse. Lawyers don't want you to do anything possibly that could get in trouble. So they're working for a business. It's not just that they're working in admission, they're working for the university as a whole. They're representing the university. And the lawyers are saying lots of things right now to them. You know, how are we going to deal with budget cuts? How are we going to deal with if we have to start in January? How are we going to deal with some of these big topics that are affecting both the incoming class and students who are thinking about applying? And so there are more questions than ever now, but there are fewer answers. So a lot of my experience in some ways may not be strictly applicable, but there's enough that I know that I think I should share. The first thing I think I should share is my title for this particular event is from Jack Nicholson's famous line from A Few Good Men, and I hope all of you will take time to watch. It's about a 3-minute YouTube because it's really good.
We'll include that in the show notes. It's a classic scene. You can't handle the truth.
So,
but we want the truth, whether we can handle it or not.
Right.
I mean, there was always a part of me that had to self-censor, although people that really know me know I don't self-censor enough. But I am confrontational because I just feel like I don't have time to hear stuff that may not be as helpful as it should be and could be. And so I see myself as a gadfly. You know your philosophy, you know that references to Socrates, who didn't end well, by the way. But I bring a lot of years, I'm old, I bring a lot of different experiences in terms of evaluating low-income students, international students, honors scholars students. So it's not like I'm only focusing on one thing. I feel like I try to focus on admission in a larger sense, and then try, when I work with people, to work very specifically with them. And what do I mean by that? Well, one size does not fit all, but I'll use my typical narrative here, that there's sort of two doors that you have to enter into if you want to get into a selective school. And door number one, it's what groups do you belong to? And door number two is who are you? So door number one can consist of anything from where do you live? And I mean by that, that's a pretty wide-ranging thing. Do you live in the US? Where do you live in the US? What school do you go to? How many people in your school?
So tell me, with where you live, tell us where would be desirable to live in the US from an admissions perspective.
There's a joke among admissions officers that, you better be, if you're from Montana or Wyoming or North or South Dakota, you're in much better shape than Westchester County.
That's right.
Cherry Creek, Colorado, Fairfax, Virginia, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we know that, I think, in the industry, but I think a lot of people may not be aware that there is some preferential treatment to the state that you may be coming from, right? So
yeah, that's one of those groups is, they say there aren't quotas. Here's another thing. Okay, a quota is an exact number. A goal isn't.
Right.
There's, if you're a state school, you have, you're mandated at some schools by the percentage of out-of-state students you can have. And you get in big trouble if you don't come there. So of course you have quotas. I mean, you have to. The state tells you you do, or you'll lose your funding.
And
so
from another perspective, you want to look at this idea that you're trying to put together a vibrant educational community. And at the very least, you want one person from every state on campus. At the very least, right? At the very least, you want people from a wide range of countries, just to bring different perspectives and personalities to the conversation.
So that's the typical response to me. And mine is, so if you're from China, you're going to represent all of China?
Right, of course.
Seriously? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Shanghai, Beijing, Suzhou, you name it. I mean, it's a huge place. And it's like saying, are Californians the same as New Yorkers?
Sure.
They're not the same. Southern Californians are not the same as Northern Californians.
Yeah. So those go into the mix. I mean, in some sense, if you go to a typical good high school or a typical bad high school, it doesn't much matter where you are.
Mm-hmm.
They're offering the same kinds of classes. They're offering, many of the same activities. Is there a substantive difference between if you live in Cherry Creek in Colorado or you live in Fairfax County in Virginia? I mean, a little bit, but not demographically speaking. I mean, students who go to the top schools in those areas are typically higher income,
Mm-hmm.
two-parent families, not first generation. There are exceptions, but we're shaped as much by our families and certainly economics as anything.
So you're just having more homogenous groups. The kids that go to the best schools in a given county that come from certain economic tiers are more alike than unalike, no matter where they live.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, and as far as what would you say about public versus private? What kind of differences are there? A student who goes to a public high school versus a private high school?
So that's a really good question, and I'll steal the answer that a lot of admissions officers use. It depends. Meaning, which schools are you, there are some of the best schools in the world are public.
Mm-hmm.
You go into Thomas Jefferson in Fairfax, you go into Stuyvesant in New York, you go to Chicago lab schools. These are public schools, but many of them are magnet schools. So you have to take a test or some way of being selected into those programs. There are private schools that are basically like too many colleges in this country. They're just trying to, make enough money so they exist. So that doesn't.
You're starting to get into some other truths there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real truth. This whole virus, COVID-19 thing is going to take down, I think, a fair number of colleges, and I will be honest enough to make people mad at me. If I don't, then I'm not doing my job, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there are some schools that are not providing the services for the amount of money people are paying.
We're at a very interesting time, and Amy and I speak about this all the time, how there's almost a perfect storm for colleges because you already have the NACAC changes to admissions rules. You have demographic shifts that are just naturally decreasing the number of college applicants, and now you have the very real threat of maybe campuses not opening in the fall. And you are absolutely right, Park, that many colleges have concerns, they have fears for their own viability.
Yeah, and it's not just those schools that are thinking about things, it's the very top schools too. I mean, one school in particular lost $2.5 billion in the last 3 weeks.
From their endowment.
Yeah.
Yes.
You think that's not going to affect their research? You don't think that's not going to affect their hiring? Everybody in every department in a college or university is getting a memo now saying, okay, what would it look like if you cut 10%? What 20? What 30? What 40? They're not rolling in more money because of this. They don't have that money. They've lost huge amounts of money.
So the implications then there, let's talk about that, that some people might not be thinking about would just be the idea of if some families are in a position to pay more, let's say the full pay family, then one of the things to be aware of is those students may be better set up in the admissions process if they know that coming into that school, this is a student who's going to pay the sticker price. Would that be fair?
Oh, no, it isn't fair.
It isn't fair. True. Sorry. That was the wrong question.
but that is true.
That is true. Yes. Thank you for the clarification.
So, yeah, I mean, you think schools are going to tell you anybody they take off their wait list is probably going to be a full payer? No. Do you think they're probably going to do it? If I was a betting person, I would bet on it. Because they have to, it's just they're hemorrhaging money right now. How can you not think of that? I mean, they're having tons of people who are coming in the fall. I mean, we just lost, 17 million jobs in the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. All these people are now going to admission offices and saying, we don't have the money, you got to give us financial aid. And they're like, what? So there's this is a crisis in so many ways that we're going through, but it's hitting hard in education, really hard, and families. I mean, I feel really sorry for families right now.
Is it true, Park, that full pay students have always had an advantage in admissions? That just that advantage is heightened today, or is this an entirely new phenomenon?
That's true. I mean, there are a few that say they're need blind. I'll just stop there.
Yeah.
But
there was a face made, I can acknowledge. Yeah. Doesn't translate to audio.
But most schools just don't have enough money to be need blind, and they're upfront about that. But now it's Angel Perez, very well known in the field, right? Wrote for the New York Times last year about this very issue. He's a huge advocate for first generation underrepresented students. And they keep coming back and saying, no, you got to take people that can pay. No, you're too high there. Have to cut it, have to cut it. That's just a reality.
Well, it's a right now, at least, it's a viability issue for some schools, right? I mean, if they need the funds.
Right. They have, he had no choice. They just told him, you got to cut these kinds of students and take these kind of students before we send our letters out.
Yeah, this is, we were reading an article earlier today about Reed College, I think it was, back 10 years ago. Same thing. They put together a class and everybody looked great. And then they looked at the numbers and said, well, this isn't financially viable.
Yeah.
we need to make some changes.
Yeah, they're reading they have to, any company basically has to meet the bottom line. If they don't, they're in trouble. Is there some money coming toward education? Some, but it's not going to cover nearly enough.
This is a hard truth for people to swallow.
Yeah, I think the challenge right now for universities is they're also straddling. They're straddling the incoming class, right? Their current students who they've had to give refunds or money back to, because of sending kids back home. So they're losing money that way. They have these potentially new students coming in, but at the same time, they could lose those students come August, right? If schools don't go back in person. So, and then they go to to select their next class next year. And obviously, the role of finances is, it's going to matter.
And on top of that, summer programs are done. A lot of schools make money in the summer with all these programs. So they're getting pounded. Let's just say,
yes.
There's no getting around that. They're getting hit really hard.
Yeah.
I would worry about I would advise, and in part I'm biased because I have a daughter who did this, but a gap year.
Right.
Gap years are, I think, incredibly useful if you do something interesting. And if you don't have the money, it doesn't mean you have to jet off to some exotic place and hemorrhage money. You can make a real difference in your community now. And then things may have settled down. Maybe they'll get back economically. Maybe you can get financial aid the following year. I would encourage everyone to at least consider it, because do you want to start in January? Do you want to pay money for online classes? You really need to think about this stuff. And I'm more like, well, yeah, I know you'll go crazy sitting at home, kind of. But when we can go out again, you can really make a difference in a community.
You can do something. In episode 64, we spoke with Ethan Knight of the Gap Year Association, and the different kinds of gap years that he described and how enriching and fulfilling they sounded made me want to take a gap year, but I guess I always do. But what you're describing is right for a lot of teenagers and wrong for a lot of colleges. That if you're taking more applicants off the table or they're deferring, that is threatening. That is threatening to the viability of these institutions.
Well, I would wonder, Park, how much can institutions handle or manage significant number of students compared to prior years asking for a gap year?
Well, most schools say they give gap years, so it's in writing. So if they say, I'm sorry, because of economics, you're coming, they'll get sued.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be smart for a student who's considering that to not mention it in the application, not mention it until after the admission.
Probably.
Well, right now it would be the situation of our current seniors, right? The class
of
2020.
Those are the ones I'm thinking.
Right,
that's a
they're
good point. Right,
accepted.
they're already accepted.
They're already accepted, which is, of course, what would fuel a desire to pursue a gap year. It's just that I didn't know what kind of, are there numbers that universities can only grant so many? I know one of the concerns from some parents of the class of 2021 is that, well, what if a lot of these 2020 kids take gap years? They're going to be holding the spots that we want next year. So how does that play in admissions?
Yeah, that's a great point. And every school is going to be different. It depends.
Well, in your years
If
of
you're
admissions,
a small liberal arts school, that's going to hammer you right away.
right, especially a
If
small
you're a
liberal
big
arts
state
school.
university, probably not.
Did you see much of gap years when you were at UVA? Is that something that's kind of really a much more recent trend?
It's definitely more recent. I mean, it was also more of a class thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Frankly.
That makes sense. So, Park, if I can ask, a lot of the truths of admission that people don't normally know are a little bit unpalatable. Are there any positive truths, things that people don't really know that they'd actually be thrilled to know?
Well, it's not so much a secret, but I always tell people, do you know how lucky you are to be stressed out?
Right.
And they're like, what? And I'm like, you have an option of going to college. If you're trying to get into a top 50 school, it's not all fun. Let's just say it's really stressful, and lucky you, because there are people I guarantee would give an appendage to be where you are. And, perspective matters. And I don't think there is enough emphasis on that. It's not like it's a secret, but parents don't get very far when they say that to their kid. But I wish schools would say it too. But they don't want to scare them away. But I'm just saying, you are lucky because, most people never go to college. Globally, you're in a tiny proportion. The US is a great place to get a secondary education. So in some ways, you can stop stressing about whether you can go to college in many cases, as long as you have the money. But even if you don't, there are probably some that may be able to help you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting perspective. I heard research, and I haven't been able to track it down, but that if you were in a position to apply to one of the top tier schools, then your success in life wasn't even based on whether you got into one. It's just if you were a credible applicant, if you could credibly apply to an Ivy League or one of these highly exclusive schools, even if you didn't get in, chances are you were still going to be great.
Yeah, but people forget. Someone who was in charge of the honors programs, selecting students, they're as good or better than any kid at an Ivy, generally speaking, just in terms of testing, APs, all this other stuff. That's where the more subjective stuff comes in. But if you come in at the top 5%, you're probably going to leave at the top 5%. That's the advantage of an honors program, let alone money or whatever. That's exactly right. But the thing is, then you start getting into ground you can't go into in admission. For example, standardized testing. All these people, it doesn't mean anything. So the University of California did a study this year, and their faculty went very deep. And you know what? You know the answer.
Of course we do.
We
followed every step of the saga.
Yeah, testing does matter, and it matters more than a lot of the things they say are better predictors. And that's as much as I'm going to say about that.
We really couldn't end on a better note.
That's right.
we
didn't pay him and we didn't pay him to say that, by the way.
No, it's just reality.
Right.
It is reality.
And they're not hearing that. They are not. That's been buried. If you hear, do you hear any colleges saying, oh, wow,
No, as a matter of fact, there are other individuals in the UC system that are now trying to walk that research back.
Oh yeah, of course they are.
It does. These are what they call inconvenient truths.
Yeah.
Which I guess is kind of like the slogan of what we're talking about, right?
Right.
Inconvenient
Exactly.
truths.
That is a point to end on.
We could talk about the truth about college admissions, whether you can handle it or not, all day, but we are out of time. Thank you so much, Parke, for joining us today.
Oh, it was great to be here. We laughed, we cried. It was better than Cats.
I know that reference. If listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Email, I have a weird name, ParkeMuth@gmail.com.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Tests and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.